Good afternoon, and thank you to everyone joining us. My name is Jesse James. I am a state senator from Wisconsin and serve as co-chair of the Council of State Governments Midwestern Legislative Conference Corrections and Public Safety Forum. I will be helping lead and moderate this webinar with the assistance of my fellow forum co-chair, Ohio Senator Michelle Reynolds, as well as officers of the MLC Education and Workforce Committee, committee co-chairs Nebraska Senator Jana Hughes and Minnesota Representative Bernie Perryman and Kansas Representative Mary Lynn Poskin, who is the committee's vice chair. Both the forum and committee are bipartisan, binational groups of state and provincial legislators from across the Midwestern region. In addition, we are pleased to have legislators from each of our Midwestern states and some of our affiliate provinces attending today's webinar. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone this webinar is being recorded, and both the recording and presenter slides will be available by tomorrow on CSG's Midwest website at www.csgmidwest.org. We will wait to answer questions until after all the presentations are completed, but you are welcome to type your questions into the Q&A feature as you think of them. And now I'm going to bring in my colleague, Ohio Senator Michelle Reynolds, to give us an overview of today's webinar and introduce our first presenter.
Well, thank you, Senator James. As policymakers and leaders, one of our critical responsibilities is to help ensure the safety of all of our citizens. And perhaps nowhere is that more important than enabling schools to have the best prevention strategies to safeguard our students. Today, we are going to focus on two promising safeguards: installing silent panic alarms to alert law enforcement when a potential threat arises, and strengthening schools' behavioral threat assessments, or BTA systems policies. The first intervention strategy is referred to as Alyssa's Law, wherein schools are directed to install silent panic alarms linked directly to law enforcement systems in order to help expedite response times to emergency situations. We are very pleased to have with us today Lori Alhadeff. She is the mother of Alyssa, the law's namesake, and founder of the nonprofit Make Our Schools Safe. Lori Alhadeff was raised in New Jersey and graduated from the College of New Jersey with a Bachelor of Science in Health and Physical Education and a Master of Arts in Education from Gratz College. She is a former K-12 health and physical education teacher at Union Township School in Hampton, New Jersey, where she coached volleyball, cheerleading, and softball. She also has experience in health and physical education as a teacher for children with dyslexia and language-based learning disabilities. For 14 years, Lori was a stay-at-home mom of her 3 children. When her daughter, Alyssa, was tragically killed in the Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida on February 14, 2018, also known as the Parkland shootings. She and her husband, Dr. Ilhan Alhadeff, co-founded Make Our Schools Safe, dedicated to protecting students and teachers at school. Lori will help us learn more about Alyssa's Law and recent legislative efforts being made across the country, including in my state, Ohio. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you, Senator Reynolds. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here today. And my name is Lori Alhadeff, and I am the co-founder of the nonprofit organization Make Our Schools Safe, which empowers students and staff to help create and maintain a culture of safety and vigilance in a secure school environment. On February 13th, the day before the tragedy, my daughter Alyssa played in her last soccer game. We didn't know it that day, but Alyssa played amazing. Her passing was on, her shooting was on, her heading, And when she got into the car, I turned around to Alyssa and I said, Alyssa, do you know you just played the best game of your life? And she's like, yeah, I know, Mom. And Alyssa wore the number 8 on her soccer jersey. She was the captain of her team. And when you turn the 8 sideways, it's the infinity symbol in our logo, Make Our School Safe, which infinity means forever. And so forever, I will honor Alyssa and be Alyssa's voice. Next slide. So Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School is a high school located in Parkland, Florida. And Parkland is a very affluent community, and I said we lived in the Parkland bubble. We never thought that something like this would happen to us here, but this is the day that really changed everything that day. Next slide. So it was Valentine's Day. It was a day that was filled with, supposed to be with chocolate, love, and Alyssa was actually not looking forward to this day. Alyssa didn't have a Valentine, and so I knew that. So I created this gold bag and I put inside there a chocolate bar with diamond earrings, and I drove Alyssa to school. And we had to pick up our neighbor, so I put the earrings in Alyssa's ears, and then I drove in front of the school, dropped Alyssa off, and Alyssa looked so beautiful. She was wearing a black and white dress. And I turned to Alyssa and I told Alyssa that I loved her. And that would be the last time that I would see Alyssa alive. I received a text message later that day saying, shots fired at Stoneman Douglas High School, kids running and jumping the fence. Next slide. And I immediately had this sense of loss that came over my body. I knew that something was drastically wrong. As a mother, you just have that sense that when something is going on with your kids. And I got in my car. I drove as fast as I could to Stoneman Douglas High School. I remember calling my husband, and I just kept calling and calling, and finally he picked up, and I just started screaming at him because I just knew something was drastically wrong. And I ended up parking my car on a sidewalk, got out, started running towards the school, and there was law enforcement everywhere with big guns, and I just remember people just standing around. Nobody really knew what was happening. There was zero communication from the school district, and we didn't know. Alyssa's best friend came up, Abby, and I remember looking at Abby and looking at the space next to Abby because they were always together. And I said, Abby, where's Alyssa? And she didn't know. And Abby actually happened to be at where the Walmart was, where the shooter went to get a soda after he murdered 17 people. And luckily, Abby was okay, but and Abby then got a text message from a friend, and I asked Abby, what is it? What happened? Abby said that Alyssa was shot, and I immediately fell to the ground. I blocked that moment out in my memory for probably 3 or 4 months, but I got up and I started running towards the school. And the police officer, I was like yelling at him. And there's actually video of this, of me yelling at the police officer. My husband was next to me, and he's a doctor, and he was very calm. And I was just, yelling because in my mind I kept thinking, my daughter is shot, like she's going to the hospital, she's getting help. And the police officer just really didn't say anything to me, but he sent me with another police officer to go what's called the reunification center. And so the police officer took me there. At the Marriott, and I was literally the first person there. It wasn't even set up yet. And so in my mind, I was thinking Alyssa's at the hospital. So I ended up going with a complete stranger in his car. He told me he'd take me to the hospital. And I got to the light and I said, well, I got to go with a police officer because I'm thinking they're going to put lights and sirens on and get me there faster. And I ended up going in a police officer's car, and he got me to the hospital, and we went into the emergency room. I thought that I saw Alyssa because I saw a girl with long black hair, but unfortunately it wasn't Alyssa. And I ended up going back with the police officer to the reunification center. And at this time, there was hundreds of people running around, and they kept putting the people that couldn't find their loved one into a certain space. Ended up in the big ballroom. I was only wearing this like very small black tank top, and I was freezing. And my body honestly was in complete shock. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know where Alyssa was. We were given no information. And they kept asking us to tell them, the police, the FBI, what Alyssa was wearing. And we kept telling them over and over and sending them emails of what Alyssa was wearing. And it was really horrible the way that we had to wait around. You know, I went into the bathroom at one point and just started screaming. My head was spinning with trauma. And finally, so my rabbi was there, and I remember telling Rabbi Gutnick, I said, "You need to start planning the funeral arrangements for Alyssa because we're Jewish, and you plan the funeral for the next day." And he said, "No, have faith." And I said, "No, you need to do this," because Alyssa was the type of person that would do anything to get to me. She would contact me. She would find a friend's phone. She would call me. She would be there. And so I knew something was drastically wrong. And Rabbi Gutnick said, "Yes, okay, I've got this." So we waited. And then finally at 2 o'clock in the morning, the FBI called us into a room and m- basically said that they didn't want to talk in front of me. And I told them to, no, you need to just say it. And they said that Alyssa was shot in the face and was unrecognizable. And the most horrific moment of my life, I found out the wrong information. So Alyssa was shot 8 times, but she was not shot directly in the face. And so they had us sign paperwork at the time, and it was the most awful thing possible because, in this trauma, in this situation, like you shouldn't have people signing paperwork, and they had us drive our own cars home. Like we were in no mindset to be driving a car. So the next day, I ended up going to the morgue with my mother because I wanted to see Alyssa. And they came back with an 8 by 10 photo of Alyssa. And that was the first time that I knew that Alyssa was dead. And my husband and I, we got to physically see Alyssa. And I just remember taking my hands and just trying to warm Alyssa's body. She was so cold, and I was seeing where she was shot. And it was just the most horrific, awful thing for a parent to have to go through. So after the tragedy, my husband and I, we started Make Our School Safe very quickly, and we're focusing on 3 things. One is Alyssa's Law. 2 is MOS clubs, Make Our School Safe clubs, where students in high schools help to create a culture of safety in their school. And thirdly, we have raised over $1 million given back to schools for school safety projects. And then I also knew in order for me to make a direct impact and change here, I ran for the Broward County School Board, and I've been on the school board for the last 7 years. Next slide. And after the tragedy, some of the students here in this picture, we went to New York City and we talked about Make Our Schools Safe, and we talked about how to make change with safety specifically, and how students can have a voice for change. And building those relationships with our students is so vitally important. They know what's going on. The whole see something, say something is so vitally important, and that we can help prevent violence from happening before it happens. The kids, they know what's going on in their Snapchat. They know, when something is wrong. And, a lot of times it's not going to be about school shootings, but there's so many other, from mental health issues and problems that we need to solve, from to bullying. And so our students really help to make that change. Next slide. So Alyssa's law is a law where it is a panic button. So it can be a wearable panic button. So we can press the panic button in a emergency situation, whether it's emergency, like a medical emergency or just the staff assist. They press the panic button 3 times and then help gets there faster. It's geofenced the area, so help knows where to go and they can pull up the cameras in, like, say, an active shooter situation where the SRO needs to go to help to take down the threat and help to save lives. And so this is such a crucial piece of legislation, and it's so vitally important that we get Alyssa's law passed nationwide so that every school can have their panic button to be used in these emergency types of situations. And we know that Alyssa's law and these panic buttons has helped to save lives in the Appalachia shooting in Georgia. 9 people who were shot. One of the teachers saw the gunman and started pressing their panic button, and EMS was able to get there and to help then triage those students that were shot, and they all lived. Next slide. So one of my sayings is time equals life. And so the faster we can get help there, the more lives that we'll save. And so on February 14th, the gunman walked onto Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, walked past the security guard, the guy in the golf cart. Unfortunately, he didn't call code red. He didn't have a panic button. He didn't call lockdown, but he knew it was Crazy Boy. He recognized the kid. He was carrying a gun bag. And so unfortunately, he was able to just walk into the school. The doors were unlocked, and Alyssa was in the first classroom, room 1216. Alyssa was in the direct line of fire when he shot into her classroom. He killed Alex and Elena, and he went down the hallway and then came back to Alyssa's classroom. Alyssa ran to the back. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to get behind the desk where all the other students were, and he shot again directly at Alyssa. And it's just so traumatic, so horrific, and just it's so that's why this is so important that Alyssa's law, these panic buttons, we know that it saves lives, and it's so vitally important to get this in every school across the country. Next slide. So we have passed Alyssa's law now in 10 states: New Jersey, New York, Texas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Utah, Florida, Washington, Oregon, and Georgia. And our goal is to pass this nationwide. You can see that we have a lot of states in progress in gray. And but we need to do better. I know as an elected official, like, it's so vitally important that we put in legislation that in these laws, Alyssa's law, in states where we can make a direct impact and change. And so we know that with this law, with this panic button, that lives are being saved every single day. As school board member, we have the Centegix wearable panic button, and every month since it's been implemented, we've had between 900 to 1,000 presses of the panic button. Predominantly it's used for behavior issues, also just staff assists, elopements, medical emergencies, but it's absolutely helping to save lives. And we're going to have a federal bill called Alyssa's Act, which will create standards around emergency response. And so we're really excited. Congressman Burgess Owens is going to be filing this bill soon, since now the government's opened. And so we believe that creating that law around emergency response will then help to get us to be able to pass Alyssa's law at the state levels. And our goal is to have Alyssa's law mandatory and funded. Next slide. So this is my beautiful daughter, Alyssa. Alyssa loved the beach. She loved hanging out with her friends. And we miss her every single day. I wear Alyssa on my necklace and on my tattoo. It says "Live for Alyssa." And every day I want to honor Alyssa and really try to make an impact in our country to get Alyssa's Law passed nationwide because we need to protect our kids. You know, Alyssa should still be here. Alyssa should be graduating from Florida State University this year. And unfortunately, you know, she's not because she was murdered in her English classroom. And that's unacceptable. Our kids should be able to go to school, be safe, thrive in their schools, and not be worried about being shot up by an AR-15. And so it's our job to protect our kids. It's our job to create those layers of school safety protection from mental health to panic buttons. And so I try to honor Alyssa every day, and every state that we pass Alyssa's Law in helps to make our schools safe. Next slide. So I just would like to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. If you take out your phone and scan this QR code, it will link you up to our website and you can contact me. My information is there below. And I would love to help you to try to get Alyssa's Law passed in your state. And I know that we can do this, and together we will make our schools safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Lori. It was very impactful, and I appreciate hearing from you and deeply feel for you too. So thank you for your story. My name is Bernie Perryman. I am a state representative from Minnesota and co-chair of the Midwestern Legislative Conference Education and Workforce Committee. Our second presenter today is Jennifer DePauli, a senior researcher at the Learning Policy Institute. Jennifer co-leads LPI's Whole Child Education efforts. She directs the Whole Child Policy Table, working with partners and policymakers to collectively drive systems change aligned with the science of learning and development. Jennifer also brings this lens to learning and development. Jennifer also brings this lens to supporting the policy and practice initiatives of the Center on School and System Redesign and in leading LPI's portfolio of school safety work. Jennifer began her career teaching middle grade students and later pre-service teachers at the University of Akron and Ohio State University. Prior to joining LPI, she served as the Senior Research and Policy Advisor at Civic Enterprises, where she led research on raising high school graduation rates and social and emotional learning. Before that, she conducted school choice and charter school policy research at Policy Matters Ohio. Jennifer earned her PhD in education from Ohio State University, where she focused on state and district level K-12 education reform policy. She also holds a master's in middle childhood education and a BA in communications from the University of Dayton. During today's webinar, Jennifer will talk about ways states can strengthen their behavioral threat assessment system policies for schools. Welcome, Jennifer, to the webinar.
Thank you, Representative Perryman. I'm very happy to be here. And I wanted to also say thank you to Lori for that very powerful presentation. You can go to the next slide. So over the past few years, the Learning Policy Institute, or LPI, we've been examining the evidence behind the most common approaches schools are taking to keep kids safe in schools. And I want to point out from the start that when we think about school safety, it's critical to understand The violence prevention measures work best when schools feel both physically and psychologically safe for students and staff. If this is not at the forefront of adopting safety practices or policies, any measures that get adopted will be less effective. Next slide. You can go back a slide. So we've released 2 reports. Our first report released in 2023, we looked at 2 sets of school safety strategies. We looked at strategies to increase physical security or school hardening. And second, we looked at strategies to build supportive school communities. I'll go through those pretty quickly. And our latest report, which was just released last month, we explored the research on behavioral threat assessment systems. So like I said, given the growing popularity of these assessments, I'll spend most of my time on those. Next slide. But going back to our first report, we first looked at investments in physical security, and we found that while many of these strategies have become commonplace in schools, they may not be sufficient enough to ensure student safety. So first, we looked at controlling access to the building and badging staff and visitors. This has become a nearly ubiquitous practice in schools. However, we found that there has been no research on the impact of those measures on school safety. Second, we looked at security cameras, which have been found effective in reducing property crime, but there's no evidence that they effectively improve student safety or reduce school violence. And then third, we looked at metal detectors, which are often proposed as a school safety measure due to their visibility and perceived ability to prevent weapons from being brought into the school building. However, there's not strong evidence that metal detectors improve school safety. Next slide. Next, we looked at went backwards instead of forward. There we go. One more slide. Nope, we're going backwards. One more. There we go. All right. Next, we looked at the evidence on employing school resource officers. Research shows that their presence has mixed effects on school safety, increasing the number of weapons detected and decreasing the number of fights within schools, but having no effect rates on school shootings or gun-related incidents. And the presence of school resource officers has also been linked to increases in suspension, expulsions, chronic absenteeism, police referrals, and student arrests, all of which can have a long-term negative impact on students. And those effects are consistently and significantly larger for Black students and students with disabilities. And then not on this slide, but last, we also looked at arming school staff, which we know is a method that's often proposed in the wake of a school shooting. There's no evidence that arming staff in K-12 schools is effective in improving school safety. Instead, evidence on firearm deaths outside of schools suggests that having more firearms in schools could be detrimental to school safety. Next slide. Then, like I said, we also looked at strategies that focus on building school environments that support students' physical and psychological safety. The first thing we looked at was mental health supports. Studies have found that school-based mental health services are effective in supporting students' well-being, and that school counselors can reduce disciplinary incidents, disciplinary recidivism. It also can improve teachers' perceptions of school climate and student behavior, and increases boys' academic achievement. Then we looked at social and emotional learning programs. There's a very large body of research that finds that social emotional learning programs can help reduce rates of behavior problems and emotional distress, increase rates of pro-social behavior, improve relationships with others, and increase students' engagement in learning. And one survey found that students in schools with social emotional learning programs reported feeling safer in their schools than their peers in schools without those programs. Next, we looked at restorative practices and positive relationships. Restorative practices build community and resolve conflict with opportunities to make amends and are an alternative to exclusionary discipline practices, which are ineffective in improving school safety, harmful to students' academic achievement and attainment. Studies of restorative practices consistently find that they improve school safety, reduce the use of exclusionary discipline, decrease rates of student misbehavior, and improve school climate. And finally, structures that support positive relationships within schools, including small learning communities, advisory systems, block scheduling, looping, smaller class sizes, and building strong school-family connections. Multiple studies have found that positive relationships between students and staff throughout the school can help prevent physical violence and bullying. And one study found that they improve communication about potential threats, which is important given the last strategy, which I said we just put a report out. We looked at behavioral threat assessment. So next slide. So behavioral threat assessments were introduced by federal initiatives developed after the 1999 shooting at Columbine High School. They're grounded in research conducted on school shooters, which found that while there is no definitive profile of a school shooter, most exhibited some type of concerning behavior or indicated a need for help prior to committing an attack. Several follow-up reports also revealed that prior to most attacks, students in the school had knowledge of the attacker's plans, but did not report their concerns. This finding suggested that proactively identifying potential school safety issues may be possible and that intervening could help prevent attacks. Next slide. Behavioral threat assessments have been used in schools, like I said, since the early 2000s, but the more widespread adoption of these systems have happened in the past 5 to 7 years. As of the date of our report, so last month, 45 states have established some form of a behavioral threat assessment policy, either through a codified state statute or through non-codified means. And 85% of school and district leaders report using BTAs in their schools. So for this group, you can see almost all of your states have adopted some sort of policy around behavioral threat assessment, whether codified or not. Next slide. Two key pieces of federal guidance, one from the FBI and one from the National Threat Assessment Center, serve as the basis for school-based behavioral threat assessments. Two models, the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidance, or CSTAG, which many of you might be familiar with, and the Salem-Kaiser Cascade model, which is largely used in the Pacific Northwest, where it was developed, have been widely adopted or adapted by states and school districts. Next slide. As conceptualized in schools, BTAs are intended to establish a reporting system and multidisciplinary teams to review reported threats of violence and other troubling behaviors and determine appropriate interventions for those students. All of the major school-based BTA models identify the need for training of threat assessment teams on procedures and highlight the need for all other adults, students, and parents to understand the threat reporting and assessment process. A key tenet of BTA training is being able to quickly assess whether a threat is serious or not. And having a team that can distinguish between the two is key to ensuring students don't get unnecessarily swept up in the BTA process. While all of the models recommend that a law enforcement or school resource officer be part of the team, they also suggest that school personnel should set a clear threshold for when law enforcement should be asked to support or take over the BTA process. And most importantly, it cannot be understated that behavioral threat assessments are meant to help schools respond to threats as they arise, not as a means to profile students. Next slide. So when we went to look at the research, what we found is there's not a lot of research out there, and most of it is on one of the models. And that model is the CSTAG model, which I said many of you might be familiar with. It has a significant body of research on it, but this research has been conducted largely by the team that developed the model, and in many cases in schools that were provided with their expert training and support. Thus, most of our understanding of BTA systems implementation and potential outcomes is based on states and schools that have implemented the CSTAG model. Research on training on the CSTAG model did find immediate positive changes in the self-reported knowledge of staff who participated. Staff reported they could more accurately assess a threat, had decreased support for zero tolerance policies, had a better awareness of the goals of threat assessment, and were more motivated to implement them in their schools. Collectively, the studies on CSTAG implementation include evidence that when there's high quality and well-supported implementation of this model, it can lead to the reduction of exclusionary practices such as suspensions and expulsions, although there do remain differences by race, ethnicity, and disability status and who is referred for a behavioral threat assessment. Next slide. When considering the evidence on behavioral threat assessments, we found several areas of concern. First and most importantly, as I said at the start of the presentation, successful violence prevention programs, including behavioral threat assessments, rely on creating safe and supportive schools built on strong foundations of support for student mental health and well-being. School safety literature emphasizes the need to take a comprehensive approach to safety grounded in a caring, connected school community in which all students, staff, and families feel supported. This also aligns with the recommendation from the National Threat Assessment Center that to address threats, schools must first focus on building a safe and connected school climate to break down the quote code of silence that keeps students from seeking help for themselves or their peers. Yet, while behavioral threat assessment models are built on this relationship, few state policies clearly make the connection between supporting a positive school climate and successfully deterring threats and acts of violence. Next slide. Secondly, it's also unclear whether BTA teams are being adequately trained and appropriately staffed. Overall, it's unclear how well trained on behavioral threat assessment school staffs are being, even in schools using CSG. And without adequate training, BTAs will not be effective and may harm students who are referred to them. On staffing BTA teams, the major school models recommend at least a school administrator, a school counselor, or other school-based mental health professional, and a law enforcement official to serve on the team. However, based on reviewed research and reporting, even the requirement of specific team members by law does not guarantee their inclusion on school teams. And the existing evidence also suggests that many schools may lack the appropriate mental health supports that are key to the BTA approach, especially access to mental health counselors and services. And recent cuts to Medicaid will further hinder their ability to retain them. Without links to supports, including the counseling and mental health resources students may need the most, schools may be operating a BTA system that fails to understand why young people make threats and that cannot adequately intervene when threats are made. Therefore, these assessments should not be considered without also understanding the broader landscape of available mental health professionals and supports that are critical to properly carrying them out. Thirdly, policies and procedures for BTA implementation vary widely across states, leaving room for significant implementation issues to rise. Oh, we went backwards again. And we should be on the one that says poorly designed and implemented BTAs. One more. There we go. All right. So several studies also show that some existing biases show up in behavioral threat assessments, particularly, as I said before, in the rates of referrals for these assessments. Research finds that Black students and students with disabilities are far more likely to go through a threat assessment than their peers, which may be harmful in itself. And when behavioral threat assessments are used within school systems that are accustomed to treating students who are viewed as problematic with exclusionary discipline tactics, they may reinforce those practices. Overall, a key practice to help avoid negative implementation outcomes is to ensure that schools are communicating the purpose of behavioral threat assessments as a problem-solving violence prevention tool, not as a means to exclude and criminalize students to the entire school community. Next slide. And lastly, there are real concerns about the lack of consistent and transparent BTA data collection and reporting. In total, only a few of the states that mandate school behavioral threat assessments include language in their legislation requiring data on these systems to be collected and reported in any capacity. Data should be reported not only on the discipline outcomes of BTAs, but also on referrals and all interventions students receive. To identify bias in implementation of BTA systems, schools, districts, and states can also review this data to track whether specific student groups are being referred, receiving their threat assessments, or receiving differential discipline outcomes to ensure biases can be mitigated. And finally, data on BTAs should be made publicly available. Transparency would be one way to ensure that these assessments are regularly reviewed and engaged in continuous improvement efforts. The lack of these data means that currently the mechanisms for understanding implementation of these systems are nearly non-existent out of specific research studies. And that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Jennifer. My name is Mary Lynn Poskin, and I'm a state representative from Kansas and the vice chair of the MLC Education and Workforce Committee. With the help of our CSG staff on the webinar, I'm going to moderate the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand or type a question into the Q&A feature. Laura and Derek, do we have any questions yet that are typed in or any raised hands out there?
Representative, yeah, we do have one question. I think this probably be best directed to Lori. And the question is, it's kind of in multiple parts. My high school has a silent alarm system. It essentially looks like a blue fire alarm, and they are stationed all over the school. Is this compliant with Alyssa's law? Is there a preference or best option? And what has the response been from teachers been like? And then finally, the other part of the question is, have there been issues carrying the responsibility for the alarms?
So I would say that most likely it is compliant with Alyssa's law. The key to Alyssa's law is that once that panic button is pushed, that it directly links to law enforcement. And so the teachers, we want teachers to be empowered to be able to press their panic button and know that it's not just in an active shooter situation. It's predominantly going to be used for medical emergencies. Like if a student stopped breathing, they can press their panic button and then help can get there faster. So our teachers are feeling more assured and that our students feel safer knowing that their teacher has their panic button. And so we want to empower the teachers, right? So if they if see someone walking on campus with a gun, that they can press their panic button. And so it can be a wearable panic button that the teacher wears around their neck with their ID. And so it's really easy for them and they can use it whether they're on the playground or on the football field.
Another question.
Representative Poskin, there's also a question about does Alyssa's law require schools to install the panic alarms? And whether states fund the installation of the alarms? Does it depend by state?
So it does were you asking me?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. So yes, so it does depend on, every state kind of rolls it out a little bit different. And some states make it mandatory, fund it, and so that they would provide the funding for the panic button company. They would install these panic buttons in the schools and they would help to fund it is the best case scenario. And so like Florida, for example, it's mandatory and it's funded. And as school board member, we don't like unfunded mandates. So we're very happy to see that funded.
We've also had a couple of questions about, what are some of the costs associated with Alyssa's law? Have there ever been examples where states have actually appropriated money to go to schools? And also, is there also training that's involved with staff once states pass these?
Yeah, so the cost could be between $8,000 to $11,000 per school per year. And absolutely, there's training. Training is so vitally important that we implement training that all our teachers know what to do in these emergency situations. And I also recommend to put like a training center in the teachers' lounge so that they could practice pressing their panic button. And a lot of times when we do the drills, we are also integrating the panic button. And if it's in a drill mode, that they can practice pressing their panic button. But training, training, training is so vitally important.
And do you all provide that training, Lori?
No, Make Our School Safe does not do the training. There is a lot of different panic button companies that would implement Alyssa's law, and they would then be doing the training for the panic button.
Do we have more questions?
I've got a question, if that's all right, for Jennifer.
Please.
Jennifer, I know that here where I live in Illinois, lawmakers earlier this spring did pass a bill that will, starting in academic year 2028, start doing mental health screenings in public schools for grades 3 through 12. This is something that's optional. Parents have the right to opt out of it if they don't want to do it. But for individuals that are concerned about like what's going to happen to this data if I go through a screening, or maybe even like a behavioral health assessment, what's going to happen to the data. How can you kind of like, address their concerns?
That's a very good question. As far as I know, with mental health screenings, though, that is privately held data that's not shared, but I'm not an expert on mental health screenings and the way that data is collected and reported. In terms of behavioral threat assessments, like I said, there's really just not a lot that we entirely know about what the landscape looks like. But we have been able to talk to a few practitioners on the ground, and some of them keep the data even off of servers, so it's not even available to anybody who is not within the threat assessment team or has been invited in. But I know some folks are trying to find different ways to store it so that it's easily accessible. And I think that is a concern, is who is getting the data and when, especially if it's something that has been deemed to be not serious, which the majority of threats are deemed to be not serious. So I think that's something to pay attention to. And that's another like thing around the data is like, so many of these things got passed so quickly without the having that groundwork. So that's why I said, like, if you're saying that your mental health screenings aren't supposed to be until 2028, I think giving SEAs and giving schools the time to actually implement these things well is super important up front, and having all the tools that they need. But I don't have a better answer than that, unfortunately, when it comes to data.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Jennifer.
Senator Reynolds, I know you have a law, there's a law that's been introduced in the Ohio Senate. Would you like to talk about that? What, if there's any differences? I don't think she hears me. Sorry about that. Senator Reynolds, I'm sorry. You're on mute. There
I
you go.
hear you now. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. I know you've introduced a version of Alyssa's Law. Do you want to talk a little bit about what Ohio's, the one that you've introduced, would do? Any provisions by the state and that kind of thing?
Sure. So we introduced Alyssa's Law back in the last General Assembly and again in this General Assembly. It's moving through committee, but it essentially works the way that Lori has laid out. We didn't want to add or subtract to it. We wanted to pass it in the same version that that she has going nationally in honor of Alyssa. But we believe that the technology is prudent, especially in today's times, and we see how it has been implemented even with other schools, and how it was very, very effective in one of the last school shootings. And so we want to make sure that we have this in our schools. I think one of the things that I will point out is that in Ohio, this is not an unfunded mandate, but we're mandating that each of our schools, public and non-charter schools, have this technology. They can choose their vendor, but we just believe having this silent panic button can be used for all type of emergencies, and it would allow our GPS. It will allow our law enforcement to understand what's going on the ground with the GPS technology included in it, to be able to locate it exactly where the distress signal is coming from. So this is something that we're proposing that the state fund, at least in the beginning, to get it all set up. We have allocated over $12 million annually to our Attorney General's office for safety grants. So some of our schools actually have this technology, and they can choose whatever they'd like, but we also want to layer on top of that the silent panic alarm. So we're happy that we're working alongside Lori and her nonprofit organization trying to get this done. Our allocation is about 25 million that we're saying that we need to allocate towards this. So we're just working through committee. We definitely see the importance, but at the end of the day, you know, there's always budgetary priorities. And so we're trying to get this done. But thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reynolds. And also thanks again to Lori Alhadeff and Jennifer DePauli for their presentations and their insights. I would like to bring in my fellow committee officer, Nebraska Senator Jana Hughes, to close the webinar and discuss some of the future work that's being planned around school safety.
Thank you, Representative Poskin. Before we close the webinar, we have a couple slides that describe other recent laws across the Midwest that seek to help ensure school safety. Derek Cantu, CSG's Midwest lead staffer to the MLC Education Workforce Committee, is going to run through those.
Thank you, Senator. And yeah, thank you all again for attending this, and especially to our two amazing speakers today. I'll be brief because I do want to be respectful of all of your guys' time. But you know, here at CSG Midwest, obviously our big thing is, you know, researching different, you know, aspects of, you know, education and other, you know, avenues of public policy, and kind of looking at, you know, this Midwest state, kind of comparing to Midwest state. So I just kind of want to give a quick sampling of some of the other laws that have been passed and enacted in 2025, as well as one that was signed into law in late 2024, just kind of give a sampling of how other states in the Midwest are addressing this wide aspect of, you know, school safety. So in Illinois, there was three new laws that were passed this year that kind of came to mind. One was House Bill 1787, which is now going to require training and evacuation and law enforcement lockdown drills for substitute teachers so that they are prepared in case something happens while they're on the clock. There's also going to be more kind of like working in concert between the State Emergency Management Agency and the State Board of Education to develop planning and information procedures in case there is ever an incident where a hazardous substance is released near a school. And then the other thing that was passed earlier this year is trying to have, you know, more of a centralizing, you know, universal language on, you know, or not, sorry, that was something for next slide. Sorry, but kind of expanding the definition of cyberbullying to address this ever, you know, growing thing of AI and people using AI for nefarious purposes, or something like, you know, related to like revenge porn. Now that would be included in the definition of cyberbullying and the penalties that go along with that. Some other states that have been working on legislation this year include Indiana. Early in the year, under Governor Braun's first years in office, they established the Office of School Safety, which really will centralize a lot of the coordinating and administrating of school safety resources throughout the state, as well as studying previous school disasters so we can know what to do better in the future. In Iowa, there was a multidisciplinary school safety assessment team that was established. Then they have new rules that were authorized to them so that they can share information and records between school districts, courts, different government agencies, especially when it comes to evaluating the threat of risk of emotional or mental disturbance. And then in Michigan this year, there was two bills, House Bill 4095 and 96, that will also have greater collaboration, this one between state police and schools, in order to develop a centralized, you know, standardized response terminology and color coding systems. And this one in particular kind of came about from the school shooting that happened at Oxford High School back in 2021. So this is just a, you know, small sampling. Obviously, there's been others, but we just want to make sure to highlight those and, you know, just kind of use as a resource as well, you know, even after this presentation. So I'll go ahead, turn it back to you, Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Derek. A few quick notes before we end today. Resources from this webinar, including a recording and PDFs of the presentation, will be soon available on the CSG Midwest website and the site's events page for this webinar. And you can navigate that at csgmidwest.org. Also, both the MLC Corrections and Public Safety Forum and the MLC Education and Workforce Committee plan to hold other webinars in the months ahead, and we'll continue to alert members about these and other learning opportunities. If you need assistance or have ideas for the committee or forum, please contact the staff listed on this next slide. And then, okay, so there's that slide. And then last, additional webinars hosted by the MLC and affiliated organizations are coming up, and that's the list you see in front of you right now. So these are the ones for the rest of November, and then one in December. So in the meantime, thanks for all that joined in on this webinar, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day.